Deputy Speaker, lastly I turn to the question of animal testing and the new arrangements with respect to that. Consumers use a wide variety of cosmetics, with estimates that consumers use 7 or more different cosmetics each day. Retail sales in Australia of cosmetics and toiletries were some $3.7 billion in 2015-16. Although most of these products are imported, in the same year 18,000 people were employed in the Australian cosmetic, perfume and toiletries manufacturing industry. The industry was also worth $945 million, with exports contributing $535 million towards that figure. The importance of manufacturing cosmetic ingredients are regulated. The import or manufacture of cosmetic ingredients are regulated as industrial chemicals. Animal testing has historically been seen to be the most reliable way to check for possible human health effects. Progress has been made, and in many cases, animal testing is now more expensive and more time-consuming, whilst increasingly facing ethical and scientific questions. Whilst animal testing for cosmetic purposes no longer occurs in Australia, between 100,000 and 200,000 animals are estimated to suffer a cruel fate through cosmetic testing. Animal welfare groups have identified loopholes in this legislation, which I believe falls well short of Labor's Ethical Cosmetics Bill, which we pursued over a year ago. Firstly, they are concerned that the ban only applies to ingredients that are solely for use in cosmetics products, and therefore multi-purpose ingredients could still be tested on animals. Secondly, they are concerned that regulations will permit chemicals tested on animals for another purpose to be repurposed for cosmetic use after the cosmetic testing ban commenced. In their submission, Be Cruelty-Free Australia, which is a partnership between Humane Research Australia and the Humane Society International state, and I quote, "As currently worded, sections 103 and 168 fall short of international best practice. The EU 28, Norway, Switzerland, India, Israel, Taiwan and Guatemala have all banned new animal testing for both finished cosmetic products as well as all cosmetic ingredients, regardless of whether or not the ingredient is intended exclusively for use in cosmetics, and this same model is being heeded in similar legislation under discussion in the United States, Canada, Brazil and other major markets." End of quote. According to Be Cruelty-Free, only a small proportion of chemicals have a sole use in cosmetics. Most have multiple end uses. They also point out that the ban on the use of animal test data can help create new industries in toxicity testing techniques that do not involve animals. I note in their submission from Accord, the National Industry Association representing manufacturers and marketers of various products, and that they've raised concerns that Section 103 and Section 168, which deals with animal testing, could be in breach of Australian World Trade Organisation and bilateral free trade agreements. In one of their publications, Accord goes on to say that animal testing is not a high-profile issue for consumers and that the industry should be allowed to develop a voluntary industry code of conduct on animal testing of cosmetic products. The RSPCA and Be Cruelty-Free dispute that assertion that animal testing is not a high-profile issue for consumers. Indeed, the RSPCA said that the comment that animal testing is not a high-profile issue for consumers, and I quote, "That is completely contrary to all of the signals that the RSPCA has received from the broader Australian public on this issue. It's certainly of high concern to people." End of quote. Finally, the Department of Health's submission to the inquiry noted that in 2014-15, 4,269 chemicals were introduced solely for cosmetic use, with only 3 of those using animal test data derived since the ban in the EU. For multiple uses, there were 2,889, with only 11 using animal test data. The Department's submission states, and I quote, "This will apply a ban on the use of animal test data for more than 99% of cosmetics introduced into Australia. The remaining less than 1% are circumstances where these chemicals are also used in other industries, and this information is critical to ensure we protect consumers, the public and the environment." End of quote. This would mean that on the Department's own figures, that applying a more comprehensive ban as provided in the amendment that we will be moving would not be onerous on either the industry or the regulator. Finally, even stakeholders from industry are broadly supportive of the bill, believe that further consultation will be needed, especially with respect to the regulations. Many highlighted technical concerns which presumably will still need to be resolved. So let me summarise Labor's concerns with these bills. Firstly, the lack of notifications of introductions of chemicals through the exempted introduction category. Secondly, the replacement of the IMAP framework. Thirdly, the broad shift from pre-market to post-market evaluation is of concern, and whether ACIS will have the resources to carry out the post-introduction assessments if it is to rely only on registration fees. Fourthly, the bill and the explanatory memorandum contains no detail on the risk categorisation mix. Fifthly, the explanatory memorandum refers to critical chemical volumes but contains little detail or guidance on the characteristics of chemicals and volumes other than high and low risk. Sixthly, there is little in the explanatory memorandum to indicate how enforcement will or can be used. And lastly, the ban on the use of animal test data for cosmetics implemented in this legislation falls short of community expectations and contains loopholes. Mr Deputy Speaker, Labor will not be opposing this bill in the House. However, on account of the serious concerns raised by stakeholders and evidence heard during the Senate inquiry, we will be moving amendments. Those amendments will address the most serious concerns with the legislation, that is, the introduction of some chemicals through the exempted introduction category without interaction with the regulator, and the loophole in the ban on the use of new animals test data. Labor will also closely scrutinise the regulations, and we reserve our right to disallow any regulations which we believe do not adequately protect human health and the environment. And with those comments, I move the amendments that I have circulated in my names, and that is that all the words after that be omitted with a view to substituting the following words. Whilst not declining to give the bill and related bills a second reading, the House calls on the government to firstly remove the loopholes in the ban on the use of animal test data for cosmetic implementation in this legislation, and secondly require an animal post-introduction report to be given to the regulator listing basic information about industrial chemicals introduced through the exempted introductions category. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member for making. Is the amendment seconded? The member for Bendigo.
I second the amendment and reserve my right to speak.
I thank the member.